A huge weather pattern change is coming to the United States over the next 10 days, and this includes the potential for a huge cold blast, perhaps even a winter storm, severe weather returning, and also the potential for a rare mid-November hurricane in the Caribbean Sea, which may end up becoming a threat for Cuba and maybe even Florida as we go into next week. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down exactly what you need to know about the weather that'll be impacting the United States over the next 10 days. Let's go ahead and begin with what's happening across the country this morning, which for the time being, things are drying out across the entire Great Plains and also up and down the East Coast. The only thing that's really going on right now is this little area here in the Gulf of Mexico. This is what's left of what we had with Tropical Storm Raphael, which no longer exists, but this has been able to burst a little bit of convection back over near Florida over the last few hours. Now, aside from that, we are really done with the Gulf of Mexico activity, at least for the next 4 or 5 days, until this next tropical wave enters into the Gulf of Mexico. At least we think that is what's going to be happening in about 7 days or so, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment. It does remain active back over on the west coast, as we do have atmospheric rivers that are continuing to pummel tons of rainfall across areas like Washington and Oregon, and we do think that will continue over the next few days. There's a lot of stuff we're going to be talking about in this forecast. There's a lot of variables essentially over the next 10 days that we are going to be breaking down for you in detail. One of the biggest things is going to be the temperatures over the next 7 to 10 days. This is as we go into next week, and notice that we're going to continue to see below average temperatures essentially across anywhere west of the Rocky Mountains, at least through this weekend. Once we go into next week, there is growing confidence that we are going to have a large cold air mass move right across the Rocky Mountains and eventually into the Great Plains, which will bring the potential for a cold blast across a large chunk of the Great Plains, the potentially even the Midwest as well, and maybe even the Ohio Valley by the middle and end of next week. Now, notice above this cold air mass, we have a huge area of well above average temperatures back up in Canada, and that is actually where we could see record-breaking high temperatures. I also want to point out, you see that little feature back down in Florida, that is a potential tropical storm or hurricane that might be in the picture as we go closer to about Wednesday or Thursday of next week. But again, that right now is still uncertain. We are going to talk more in detail about that here in just a moment. One of the other big things I want to point out is that the jet stream as we go into this weekend will remain a little bit more meridional, meaning that we're going to have a little bit more dips in the jet stream and a little bit more curvature. That's going to allow for a ridge to build back over in the southeast and as well as the Ohio Valley. That'll build warm air and dry air, at least for this weekend. Once we go to next week, that'll change. Large scale trough will eventually move over the Rocky Mountains, and this trough will eventually become more of a system for the Midwest and the Ohio Valley. What is going to be the big storm will be sometime around Tuesday or Wednesday of next week, and notice how large this trough is going to be, and that's what's going to bring the potential for maybe the return of severe weather, winter storm potential, and also the threat for a cold blast that could bring below freezing temperatures to a large chunk of the United States. By the end of next week, that's eventually when we could see a very stagnant weather pattern where this trough just kind of sits in the Great Plains for several days, and if this ends up happening, we could see that cold air linger for quite a while and the potential for maybe some flash flooding and maybe even some heavy snowfall accumulating over several days. Now let's put this more into simplistic terms with the future radar over the next several days, beginning with today and tomorrow, which is where we're going to have a little trough move across the Great Plains and also back through the lower Mississippi Valley. There will be some moisture that'll pull from the Gulf of Mexico, bringing the potential for some showers and thunderstorms on both Wednesday and Thursday. I don't really expect much in the way of severe weather out of this, maybe a low-end risk in the Ohio Valley, but that would be about it on Wednesday. Eventually, as we go into Thursday, there is a low chance that maybe some light snow showers could mix in with rain back over in Pennsylvania and New York, but again, not really looking at anything in terms of accumulation for the time being. By the time we go into Friday into Saturday, things are going to stay relatively dry for most of the country. Things will start to change a bit more towards the tail end of the weekend, where we will have the potential for some showers back over in the Midwest, but really the big story on both Sunday and Monday will be the atmospheric rivers that'll pummel the Pacific Northwest with very heavy snowfall in the elevations, and then the potential for flooding rainfall right near the coastline on both Sunday and Monday. By the time we go into late Monday into Tuesday, that is when the return of severe weather is possible for areas in the central and southern plains. So an area to watch for would be about Kansas and Missouri back through Texas. And eventually, as we go late Tuesday into Wednesday, that is when things become a little bit more dicey here when it comes to the weather forecast. We could have another round of severe weather. We also could have this large scale trough bring tons of cold air on the back side of it, and that could bring the potential again for a cold blast. And there will also likely be a winter storm component to whatever this storm ends up being. Where that exactly takes place is uncertain, but for the time being, the GFS model showing that in the northern plains Plains Tuesday night into Wednesday. Notice that the GFS model also shows a big hurricane in Florida, and again, we'll talk more about what the possibilities are with that here in just a few minutes. Eventually, as we go late Wednesday into Thursday, the GFS model has this system just spinning across the Central Plains, which would leave cold air in place for a large chunk of the Great Plains throughout the middle and end of next week, and also the potential for moderate to even heavy snowfall across the northern and central plains. And then really after that, we don't know what's going to happen. At this point, it's pretty likely that this trough will stick around for a few more days after that, and that could bring the potential for some lake effect snow to maybe the Midwest and the Ohio Valley and Northeast, and then that would eventually also bring some rainfall to the Northeast. But again, we don't really know what's going to happen beyond Wednesday or Thursday of next week. It's just too uncertain at this current time. One thing that we do think is going to happen, though, over the next several days is a really nice abundance here of rainfall, especially across areas like the Ohio Valley as we go throughout the next few days, and even into next week. We do think there's going to be a pretty good concentration of heavy rainfall across areas in the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, and then back through the northern and central plains, which areas like Texas and the Southeast are a little bit more skeptical at this point in terms of if you'll see some sort of significant rainfall. Now, before we go more into the tropics, I do want to show you the temperature anomalies. This will give you an idea of where we're going to be seeing above average and below average temperatures. The numbers that you see on your screen, for example, like 18, that means 18 degrees above normal, and then anything in the negatives would be below normal temperature. So this is what we're looking at for the next few days. Again, notice how the warm air will dominate most of the northern central plains and the Midwest throughout the next few days. By Sunday into Monday, that warm air mass is just going to continue to stay in place with strong southerly winds in the Gulf of Mexico, bringing warm and moist air from the south up to the north, and that'll go into areas like the Midwest and areas like Texas even on Monday. But eventually by Wednesday and Thursday of next week, that is when cold air is expected to build across the Rocky Mountains and the central and southern plains, bringing areas to 15 to 20 degrees below average even on both Wednesday and Thursday. Thursday could be one of the coldest days of the entire month thus far, where many areas will be 20 degrees below average back over in the central and southern plains. And even on Friday, and as well as even into Saturday, that cold air mass just continues to build. Even maybe a chance for some record-breaking low temperatures back over in Wyoming and maybe even Colorado sometime around November 25th, which again, keep in mind, that's about 2 weeks from now, so we don't exactly know if that's going to happen. However, with this weather pattern that we are currently thinking will happen next week, I do think there's a good chance that we'll have that potential as we get closer to next weekend, which again is still 2 weeks from now. Something I'm becoming a little bit more concerned about is the potential for a tropical storm and probably even a hurricane developing in the Caribbean Sea over the next 7 days. The National Hurricane Center has upgraded this to a high chance of developing over the next 7 days. Obviously, it looks like this is going nowhere near the United States. However, this does not show the full story. Over the next 7 days, this will be in the Caribbean Sea. Around day 7 or 8 is when this is likely to move more to the north or northeast. There's a couple of tracks. Most ensemble members and computer models bring this into the Gulf of Mexico. There are a few that bring this a little bit more towards the Bahamas, which would have missed the United States entirely. However, if something does end up developing here, I am concerned that this could become something a bit more significant as it moves towards Cuba and perhaps even in the direction of Florida with the current weather pattern that we are forecasting next week. Because if you remember, the next week we're going to be dealing with this large trough back over in the United States with a ridge out here just to the east of Florida, and with the steering pattern that we're looking at, there's a pretty good chance that this would more than likely go towards Florida as some sort of tropical system if it again ends up developing, which we think it will. Let's try to track this out here with the GEFS ensemble members, which is a bunch of computer models all embedded onto one graphic, just giving you an idea of intensity and track of this particular system. This is by the weekend. Most ensemble members do indicate development by Saturday. Several of them bring this to a hurricane even by Saturday. By Sunday into Monday, this just meanders really in the Caribbean Sea near Jamaica, maybe even going towards areas like Cuba by Sunday or Monday. Eventually by Tuesday into Wednesday, almost every ensemble member brings this to the north, and a lot of them have it going over Cuba. There are a few that take a more westerly path through the Yucatan Pass and eventually goes towards Florida as we go into late Tuesday into Wednesday of next week, and a ton of them right now have this making landfall in Florida. However, it's not, groundbreaking news here that this is definitely going to make landfall in Florida, because notice further down to the south, there are still several ensemble members that have this near Cuba and eventually pulling more to the east as we go into Thursday and Friday of next week. So there's basically two scenarios that we think could happen with this, one of which this goes towards Florida, and and it could end up being a hurricane, or it goes more towards Cuba, kind of meanders around there, and eventually tracks more east towards the Bahamas and goes more out to sea without really any impact to Florida. And one model that has been very bullish on this developing is the GFS model, and this is what it shows by the time we go into Sunday and Monday of this upcoming weekend. Again, notice the intensity of this. This is around a Category 4 hurricane, which, by the way, we've never seen a Category 4 hurricane on record in the Atlantic Ocean beyond November 18th. So if this does end up happening, which again, I would say it's a low chance right now, but it's not, impossible to happen, this would be a very rare event to happen. We've never seen a Category 4 hurricane beyond November 18th on record, and it has it like that even through November 19th or 20th, and eventually goes into the Gulf. A perfect track, by the way, for any sort of hurricane, and eventually goes towards Florida. Again, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it is obviously a potential scenario that we'll have to watch and see what happens as this unfolds over the next few days. We don't really know what's going to happen, though, until something develops in the Caribbean Sea. So again, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll keep you posted with the latest on the tropics and also the weather across the entire lower 48.